The morning air was crisp in the town of Willow Creek, the kind of sharp air that carried the scent of pine and the faint promise of snow lingering over the distant mountains. The townsfolk went about their day as usual, shopkeepers opening shutters, wagons creaking down Main Street, children darting between the dusty boards of the walkways. But all the ordinary bustle stilled for a moment when a tall, broad-shouldered rancher rode into town. Caleb Turner was known to nearly everyone within 100 miles. He was a man who kept to himself, honest in his dealings, and hard as the Wyoming earth he worked. Few knew much about him beyond his weathered face, quiet manner, and the vast ranch he ran almost entirely alone. And today he wasn't alone. Sitting beside him on the wagon bench was a woman, his new bride. Miriam Parker was not the bride the town expected for a man like Caleb. She was not slender, nor delicate, nor adorned with ribbons or lace. Her figure was round, her cheeks full, her dress plain but neat. Her hair, chestnut brown, was pinned tightly under a modest bonnet. Yet her eyes, soft, deep brown, like warm earth after rain, held a light that spoke of kindness, even as uncertainty flickered within them. Gasps and whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. "Is that his wife? Mercy, look at her size. Why, he could have had his pick of finer ladies. What's he gone and done?" Men smirked, women leaned together to gossip, and children stared boldly. Caleb dismounted, his jaw tight, ignoring the mutters. He turned and offered Miriam his hand to help her down. She hesitated, aware of every eye upon her, but placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, steady, protective, as if daring anyone to say more aloud. Still, the mocking voices carried. "She ain't exactly what I'd call a prize mare," one ranch hand muttered from the saloon steps. "More like a plow horse," another added, his laugh sharp as a whip. The men nearby chuckled, slapping each other's backs. Caleb's dark eyes flicked toward them, and the laughter faltered. He said nothing, but his silence carried a warning heavier than words. Miriam, cheeks burning, lowered her gaze, yet lifted her chin a little higher as she walked. It wasn't the first time she'd been laughed at. She knew well the sting of ridicule. A woman of her size wasn't often praised, let alone chosen as a bride. Many assumed she'd never marry. But here she was, walking beside a man who had, despite the sneers, asked for her hand. The wedding had been quiet, almost secretive. Just the preacher, 2 witnesses, and the murmur of the wind. Caleb had written to Miriam months ago after hearing of her through a church acquaintance. Her father had passed, her brothers had families of their own, and Miriam, 30 years old and alone, had been left with little future in the small town she came from. When Caleb's letter came, plain and direct, asking if she'd consider marriage and life on a ranch, she'd prayed long before answering yes. Now, standing in the center of Willow Creek with curious eyes upon her, she wondered if she'd made a fool's bargain. Caleb seemed to sense her unease. "Come on," he murmured, guiding her toward the wagon again. "Best we head home before they talk themselves hoarse." Miriam gave a small nod, climbing back onto the seat. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap as the wagon rumbled away, leaving the stares and whispers behind. The road to Turner Ranch stretched wide, bordered by rolling fields of golden grass that swayed in the autumn breeze. Miriam's gaze roamed the landscape, endless sky above, distant peaks rising proud on the horizon. It was beautiful in a lonely sort of way. "You'll find it quiet out here," Caleb said after a while, his voice low, gravelly from years of silence. "I don't mind quiet," Miriam replied softly. "I've known too much noise, most of it unkind." He glanced at her then, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but said nothing. When they reached the ranch house, Miriam's breath caught. The home stood tall and sturdy, built from rough-hewn logs, with a wide porch and smoke curling from the chimney. It wasn't fancy, but it spoke of strength, of years of sweat and labor. Caleb helped her down once more. She followed him inside, the wooden door creaking open to reveal a space both lived in and strangely empty. The furniture was simple: a table, chairs, a worn sofa, a few shelves stacked with books and tools. Everything was neat, almost too neat, as though the house had been waiting for someone to fill it with life. "It's quiet," Miriam said, her voice hushed as she set her small travel bag down. Caleb nodded, removing his hat. "It's been that way a long time. But it won't feel so empty now." Her heart squeezed at the words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to carve a place for herself here despite the echoes of laughter still ringing in her mind. That evening, Caleb showed her the kitchen, the pantry stocked with supplies, the upstairs rooms, and the small library he'd built for long winter nights. Miriam listened, asked little, and absorbed everything. Though he was a man of few words, she sensed his effort to make her feel welcome. When supper came, she cooked, nothing elaborate, just stew and bread she'd packed from her journey. Caleb watched quietly as she moved about, her hands practiced, efficient. At the table, he bowed his head briefly before eating, surprising her with the simple reverence of his prayer. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. Yet Miriam's thoughts churned. She knew whispers would spread fast across town, that Caleb Turner had married the plump woman no one else wanted. She knew neighbors would laugh, maybe even pity him. But she also knew herself. Her worth didn't lie in slimness or charm. It lay in the steadiness of her hands, the warmth of her heart, and the love she longed to give. That night, after Caleb had gone to tend the stock, Miriam stood at the upstairs window. The land stretched endlessly before her, bathed in silver moonlight. She whispered a prayer, not for beauty, not for acceptance, but for strength, to prove herself a true wife, a true partner, no matter what others thought. And though she didn't know it yet, beyond the hills 3 ragged children huddled in an abandoned shed, cold and hungry. Their whispered prayers rose to the same heaven, prayers for someone, anyone, to take them in. The first weeks of Miriam's new life on the Turner Ranch were filled with work. From dawn until the stars wheeled overhead, there was always something to do: cooking, mending, feeding chickens, tending the garden, scrubbing, washing. Caleb worked harder still, from the early crow of the rooster until exhaustion finally dragged him inside. At first, their conversations were few, spoken in quiet exchanges over supper or brief words across the barnyard. Caleb wasn't a man to waste speech. Yet Miriam began to notice small things: how he always made sure she walked on the smoother side of the path, how he set an extra log on the fire when the nights grew colder, how his eyes softened when he thought she wasn't looking. Still, the echoes of town gossip lingered. Miriam could almost hear them when she went into Willow Creek once a week for supplies. Women whispered behind gloved hands, men smirked as she passed. Poor Caleb, such a strong man, tied down to that one. She'll eat him out of house and home. Wouldn't surprise me if she's no use at all on the ranch. Miriam bore it with quiet dignity, though her cheeks often burned. Caleb, noticing, would sometimes put a protective hand on her back as they walked, as though to tell the world he'd made his choice and would not be moved. One bitter afternoon, as November winds howled across the plains, Miriam decided to take a basket of food into town. She told Caleb she wanted to visit the pastor's wife, and he offered to harness the wagon. But halfway down the dirt road, Miriam asked him to stop. "I'll walk the rest of the way. You've too much to do, and it isn't far." He hesitated, studying her with a look that said he wasn't fond of letting her go alone. But Miriam smiled, gently stubborn. "I'll be fine, Caleb." Reluctantly, he nodded and turned the wagon back toward the ranch. Miriam pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and set off. It was then she heard it, a faint sound, carried on the cold wind. At first she thought it was the cry of an animal, but as she drew closer to the old mill shed by the creek, she realized it was different. Softer. Human. Children. Miriam's heart thudded as she pushed open the sagging door. Inside, huddled in a corner beneath a thin blanket, were 3 children. The eldest, a boy perhaps 10 years old, stiffened and stepped protectively in front of the 2 younger ones, a girl of 7 and a boy no older than 4. Their faces were pinched with hunger, their clothes ragged, their eyes wide with fear. "Don't hurt us," the oldest whispered, fists clenched though his arms trembled. Miriam set her basket down slowly, her voice gentle. "Hush now. I wouldn't harm you for the world. My name is Miriam. I just want to help." The little girl peered around her brother's shoulder. "We don't got no mama," she said in a tiny voice. She went to heaven." "And Papa?" Miriam asked softly. The boy's jaw tightened. "He's gone too. Got sick last winter." Miriam's chest ached. Orphans. Alone, cold, starving. She glanced at the basket in her hands, then knelt and opened it, pulling out bread and dried meat. "Here," she said, offering it. "Eat." Suspicion flickered in the boy's eyes, but hunger was stronger. Slowly, he took the bread, broke it in half, and gave pieces to his siblings before biting into his own. The little ones ate ravenously, crumbs falling to the floorboards. Miriam's eyes stung with tears as she watched them. When they finished, she brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "You shouldn't be out here alone. You'll freeze when the snow comes." "We don't need nobody," the boy said fiercely, though his thin frame betrayed the lie. Miriam leaned forward, her voice trembling with compassion. "Everyone needs somebody. And if you'll let me, I'll be that somebody for you." When Miriam returned to the ranch with the children trailing behind her, Caleb was in the yard chopping wood. He froze, axe in hand, as he took in the sight. His wife, flushed from the cold, shepherding 3 ragged children up the steps as though they belonged there. "Miriam," he began slowly, his brows furrowing. "What's this?" "They've no one, Caleb," she said firmly, her voice steady though her heart pounded. "Their parents are gone. They were hiding in the old mill shed. Hungry. Cold. I couldn't leave them." The children clung to her skirts, eyes wary on the tall rancher. Caleb set the axe aside, wiped his hands on his trousers, and crouched slightly to meet their gaze. His face was unreadable, but his voice was softer than Miriam expected. "You've had it rough, haven't you?" he said. The eldest boy swallowed hard but didn't answer. Caleb straightened, meeting Miriam's gaze. "We'll need to talk." That evening, after the children were washed and fed, 2 asleep already in spare blankets by the fire, Miriam and Caleb sat at the table. "You took them in without asking me," Caleb said, not in anger but with the weight of truth. Miriam folded her hands, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Would you have said no?" He was silent for a long moment. Finally, he exhaled slowly. "No, I wouldn't have." Relief washed over her. She reached across the table, her hand brushing his. "They need us, Caleb. And I need them too." His gaze softened then, a flicker of something deep passing through his eyes. He covered her hand with his own, rough and warm. "Then they'll stay." Word spread quickly. Within days, the town was buzzing. "Did you hear?" Caleb Turner's wife dragged in 3 beggar children. Orphans, no less. As if she weren't enough burden on him already. "She'll fill that ranch with mouths to feed till he's ruined." But Miriam didn't care. She poured herself into caring for the children. She mended their clothes, cooked hearty meals, and rocked the youngest to sleep when nightmares woke him in the night. She taught the little girl to sew, praised the eldest boy's sense of responsibility, and filled the house with warmth it had never known before. Caleb watched quietly. At first, he stood back, uncertain. But soon he found himself joining, teaching the boy to ride, lifting the children high into the hayloft, even cracking a rare smile when the youngest toddled after him calling, "Pa!" One Sunday, when Miriam brought the children to church, whispers swelled the moment she stepped inside. But when the youngest nestled into her lap, calling her Mama loud enough for the congregation to hear, the whispers faltered. Miriam held her head high, arms wrapped firmly around the child. The pastor's wife approached afterward, eyes moist. "You've a good heart, Mrs. Turner," she said softly. "Those children couldn't have found a better home." It was the first kind word Miriam had heard in town since her wedding day. Winter settled hard over the plains. Snow drifted high against the fences, winds rattled the shutters, and nights grew long. But inside the Turner ranch house, laughter and warmth grew too. Miriam's stew simmered on the stove, Caleb's boots thudded across the floor, children's voices filled every corner. One evening, after the little ones had gone to bed, Caleb stood at the window, watching the snow fall. "They've changed this place," he said quietly. Miriam joined him, slipping her hand into his. "They've changed me too." He turned then, studying her face, the same face others had mocked, the same figure others had ridiculed. But to him now, she was radiant. Her kindness had filled his empty house, her courage had silenced his loneliness, her love had given 3 children a home. "You know," Caleb said slowly, his voice thick, "when I brought you here, they laughed. But I reckon I don't give a damn what they think anymore. You've given me more than I ever dreamed I'd have." Tears welled in Miriam's eyes. She rested her head against his chest, his arms wrapping around her strong and certain. For the first time in her life, she felt truly chosen, not in spite of who she was, but because of it. Spring would come, bringing green fields and busy days. The children would grow, laughter would linger, and in time, even the town's whispers would soften into respect. And in doing so, she became the heart of the Turner Ranch.